Ready Player One is a book set in a bleak future, where a majority of people live in poverty, and the world is controlled by an advanced video game called the OASIS. This video game is played with a virtual reality suit that allows the player to control their character's every action. The book's plot is about a secret egg that is hid in the game that would make the finder owner of the OASIS, as well as give them the will of the game's creator. I'm going to share my thoughts on the book, positive and negative. This book is hated a lot on the internet for having a subpar movie, but I'm going to be sharing my straight thoughts. The book stars Wade, a huge geek who loves all 80s pop culture. Wade lives in a community of trailers. He finds the first clue to where the egg is and embarks on a journey to find it. Wade has a character arc that mirrors many action-adventure movies from the 80s, where he starts off weak, but by the end of the book is supremely powerful and is more confident with himself. He shows his growth in power when he beats Sorrento, a formerly impossible foe. Though Wade is fine, not many of the other characters fare that well. Wade's main partner is Artemis, or Artemis, who is an internet blogger who he falls in love with. Artemis is very similar to Wade in character. Both are not confident in themselves until later in the book, both love 80s culture, and both have the same attitude. This similarity makes the romance the two share throughout the book feel incredibly forced, because the characters don't contrast in many ways, besides Artemis occasionally saying Wade should have been more careful when making a decision. The romance itself is incredibly prevalent throughout the book, and most of the time, the dialogue between them feels like someone talking to themselves. Other duos like George and Lenny from Of Mice and Men are a lot more real because they are very different characters. George is clearly the superior who brings Lenny along in his schemes, while Lenny is the oblivious powerhouse who values validation from George. Both have very different motives and personalities, and we can see why they would not abandon each other. Wade and Artemis' relationship would not be so bad if it wasn't the crux of the book, and what decides basically everything. Getting away from the romance, the other characters are quite one-note, like Shoto and Daido, who are stereotypically Japanese, and Sorrento, who is a money-hungry business guy who wants to cheat the contest to win the OASIS for himself. This sugary blandness makes it so that when any of these characters are in danger, the audience mostly doesn't care, because they're really just stereotypes. Other than the characters, my main problem with this book is the pacing. This is relevant in more ways than just one. The book is divided into 3 levels, one for each gate that is needed to ultimately find the egg. Each section is a vastly different length. The first one is 200 pages and is very slow. We have Wade's life and poverty described at length, as well as a background on the contest, including a lot of pages that can be condensed to James Holiday likes blank. The second section is far too quick at around 50 pages. In this section, Sorrento gets to the second gate before our heroes, leading to a bulk of the section being about the relationship between Artemis and Wade, which as I have previously said is not too good. This includes some of the most hilariously bad scenes I've ever read, where during the co-creator of the OASIS, Oog's, birthday, the relationship between Wade and Artemis comes to a focal point, and Artemis gives up on Wade, while an R2-D2 DJ continues to change the song, breaking up the moment that is supposed to be important. This whole scene is really dumb. Right before the breakup, the guests at the party randomly turn into goo on the ground before flying into the air. It's just too much. The actual gate is completed rather quickly. Section 3 is the climax, and is appropriately 100 pages for what is covered. Having such a lopsided book makes me wonder why they even bothered having 3 trials in the first place, when one is completed so fast. The questionable pacing doesn't end, as the book is filled with constant references to other works of fiction. This is obviously done to appeal to the book's main audience, nerds, who will likely appreciate the references to a certain extent. Personally, I think these references really bog down the book. Every time one is used, it's used in a list format, where there's a list of something someone likes, or it is used to set a scene or show an object. References take a lot of potential creativity that could have been conducted for a world with literally endless possibilities. Even worse, these references are constantly breaking up the pace. Just in case the audience doesn't know what the reference's original work was, the book explains it, usually within a paragraph or a page. These descriptions almost never have any value, and could have been put in the back of the book in an almanac, akin to the one Wade carries throughout the book. This would allow readers who wanted to see the fluff information to have a place where they could see it. The problem is intrinsic throughout the entire book. Imagine if in a normal book, every adjective was a paragraph or so long. That would just be dreadful. There's a ton of fluff later in the book. There's even a section where Wade accumulates enough wealth to live in his own apartment, where the book describes his computer setup for a page or two. This doesn't make any sense to any reader, because the book uses fake futuristic computer parts so no one can relate to the passage. This is just messy writing, and could have been better organized. One thing that dampers this book is how the whole thing is set in a video game. It is incredibly hard when reading it to not think of how dumb the situation is, considering it's in a video game. I always think of how the scene would actually look if the game was real, and it makes it hard for me to be immersed, especially when something ridiculous is happening. This is definitely more of a me thing, but it's hard for me not to notice, so I'm mentioning it. Ready Player One is a very flawed book, as I have explained, but the book does have a few high points that do keep this book from being totally bad. One of these high points is the finale, which is quite intense as it's basically a war. When the characters defeat the third trial, disaster strikes as the bad guys blow up the planet. This is a nice juxtaposition to have them all lose immediately after. It caught me off guard. I don't think that moment was worth having a chapter earlier in the book created just to resolve it though, but the moment itself is quite cool. Other similar unexpected moments are cool, like when Wade's trailer is blown up out of nowhere by the Sixers. All these surprises kept me on the edge of my seat and kept me wondering what the book was going to pull next. Another pro is how contrasting the creators of the OASIS are. Mr. Holiday is an introvert who is rarely seen and is talked about in myths, while Oog is a very public figure who is married and treats the players of the OASIS as his family. These characters ultimately represent an overarching theme throughout the book, the balance of nature and technology. We are described how pitiful the outside world is extensively, and we really get a feel for how much of a wasteland it is. At the end of the book, Wade meets Artemis in real life, and Wade proclaims, "It occurred to me then that for the first time in as long as I could remember, I had absolutely no desire to log back onto the OASIS," hinting that later on their world would be restored using Wade's newfound wealth. This theming could be a warning to the reader, as many people are getting helplessly addicted to video games in real life as humanity is to the OASIS, myself included. Even though there are elements I like when reading Ready Player One, the book was overall a confusing experience. My biggest problem is the pacing, as I have raved about, but I can still tell that the references came out of a respect for the medium, and honestly, in our modern landscape where nerd culture is treated like trash, this book, despite being badly executed, is kind of refreshing. If this author started a fresh series with less blatant pandering and homaging beloved works of fiction rather than listing them, I think we could have a book that, for its audience, could be really special.